Greetings everybody, it's Rob from the Sage Town. We're here with another Pathfinder 2nd edition video. This is another archetype video. Again, as I've talked about in my previous one, these are looking at it not just at the dedication itself, but also in terms of how I think it would play for a player from a GM side of things. So, the last video we did, we talked about the acrobat dedication. We're going to go right down the list, and we're going to start with an interesting one for this one, and that is the Aldori Duelist Archetype. Now, it's important to note before we go anywhere else with this one, this is an uncommon dedication from the World Guide. It's because it specifically says the art of Aldori dueling from a specific teacher kind of deal. Very fancy swordplay. Now, uncommon means it may not be available all over the place. So as a GM, the way I would work this is, your character either has to be from Aldori, has to make a sense, not from Aldori, from the region, kind of, and it has to make sense why your character will be where they currently are. You can be in the nearby regions around the Broken Lands, that would be kind of acceptable. But if you're very far away from this region, then there needs to be a reason why your character should have this dedication. That's how I normally play it. Like these kind of specific archetypes that are region-based kind of deal, it's very tricky because they kind of more cater towards that specific area. Now, that being said, it's an uncommon, it's not rare, so you don't have to be as like strictly hard on it. That's fine. But in terms of how I would run it as a GM, I would make sure that it makes sense why your character is coming from that region in the first place. So let's hop right in with the Aldori Duelist dedication. This is again the basic feat. You become trained in acrobatics or athletics. You can become expert. You also gain access to the Aldori dueling swords, which aren't really anything to, in my opinion, to write home about. It is a 1d8 slashing finesse weapon. It has versatile on it. So, what's this? Same one. So it's kind of like a finesse longsword in a way. So if you're playing a finesse build, that could work. But you probably want to have this for all the feats involved. So it limits you to having a specific weapon. Now, the next feat is the Aldori Parry, which gives you the ability to essentially shield block in a way. You spend an action to gain +2 as long as you have the dueling sword in your hand, which you probably will as it's your main weapon, and you don't have to raise your shield. Now, you could, in theory, get even cheekier with this, although it wouldn't be really beneficial because it would take too many actions to do this with a shield. But this lets you essentially raise your shield without having a shield, which can be useful, especially sometimes if you have that, if you have that action where you don't really have anything to do with it, or if you're coming into position and that -10 attack probably isn't gonna hit, you may as well just parry to get that +2 AC to help you with it. So overall, it's a good feat. I mean, it's not gonna break anything, but solid choice. Duelist Edge is a free action that essentially allows you to get a +2 to your initiative and draw your dueling sword. Quite a few dueling classes have this kind of feat. I think the Gunslinger has a specific one as well that lets them draw their pistol and get the +2. So this kind of initiative bonus really helps. You'll probably, depending on if you're playing into the finesse aspect with acrobatics and the finesse weapon of the dueling sword, probably have a high initiative. So you'll be a very fancy duelist, probably going really early in the battle. Nothing wrong with this. I will say, remember, you have to see at least one enemy. So in most cases, that will probably work unless the enemy's invisible. But +2 to initiative, plus being able to draw your sword. Again, the way I rule it when I play is if you're in a dungeon, like in a dungeon setting, I'm assuming the players are walking around with their weapons drawn, unless they're in the middle of doing something. So what I mean by this is, say they're like trying to pick a lock, and as they're picking a lock, they fail, and that's when, you know, an enemy busts through another door and ambushes them. I would rule, because you're picking a lock, you don't have your sword in your hand. That kind of stuff. But if you're just walking through the hallway, I'm assuming that you're probably, you know, you have your sword in your hand ready to go. You're not just walking around like do, you know. So it's still solid feat, can't go wrong with that. Aldori riposte. So whenever your opponent critically fails against you, and you are benefiting from the parry. Now this is important. This is stuff that plays off you parrying, so it makes it more important to have this as a feat. You make a melee strike or a disarm action against the triggering opponent. Now that's actually pretty good. Again, depending on your build and your reactions, I know as a GM I roll plenty of natural ones on my attacks. It's gonna happen. Sometimes I even on the -10. Sometimes you may critically fail. The disarm strike or the melee one. This is also an interesting one. The issue I have with disarm is it doesn't really work unless you critically succeed with it. I'll be honest. Like, I've had someone who had disarming ability in one of my campaigns, and the issue is having disarm as a reaction doesn't actually do much for most situations. Because if you read it, and I'll scroll down a bit just so you guys can see it a bit more. Right about there. On a crit success, you actually knock the weapon out of the hand. What that does is it forces them to spend an action, an interact action, to move down, pick up the weapon. That provokes, so keep that in mind as well. And it spends an action. That's worth it. On a success, it only means that they have a -2 because their grip is weakened on it. Now, if it's the first swing of the turn from the enemy, that's beneficial. But if it's like the last swing of their attack, it doesn't do anything, because once it goes to the next turn, it resets. So you have to crit to really make a major impact. So depending on how you feel and how you want to play your character, either one of those works. Now, unnerving prowess reaction, and it's important to note with this one, is you critically succeed at a strike or disarm. It doesn't have to be from the riposte. It can the riposte can trigger this. So you could, in theory, go parry, riposte, and then prowess them, on one reaction, basically. And this actually demoralized the target. Demoralized, I made a video a while back talking about frightened, how important that is as a condition. So it is clearly a strong, very strong thing to demoralize. It does not have the auditory trait, so you don't have to worry about language barriers and stuff like that. So overall, that's really good. You probably might crit a lot depending on your build. And then even again, you have that dream combo of parry, riposte into prowess, and that's a pretty intense off-turn ability. Saving slash. An opponent critically hits you. That's a DC 16 flat check. This one is an interesting one as a capsule. It can be really good and really bad. The reason I say for that is, again, it's a reaction, so you have to choose between this or the parry. So it depends on how you're building your character. a build, the DC 16 flat check, so that's a 25% chance that you'll actually not get crit. Could be useful. I do know as a GM that a lot of enemies, when they crit, they can do a ton of damage. They may have deadly, they may have fatal, they may have these other, you know, additional effects that happen if they crit on you. So being able to stop that crit from happening can be pretty big. But overall, it's not the most amazing feat. Like if you're struggling for a feat, I would say sure, take it. But depending on what class you're building, then there may be better options. I wouldn't say it's a must pick by any means. So the Aldori Duelist is definitely a potentially strong class. A lot of it is built into the kind of parry and riposte. I would say you can even get away without having Duelist Edge and just go into the parry, into the riposte, maybe pick up unnerving prowess down the road, and then maybe saving slash. Again, if you're playing with the free archetype, just go down the whole list and then you get all this for free on top of your class stuff. That's definitely worth it. But again, this is a solid archetype in my opinion that gives you a good use. Again, as a GM, I would need reason why the player isn't Aldori Duelist or trading from Aldori Duelist for the campaign. If you are in Cheliax or you are in Vaesia, you know, some of these other places that are so far away from the Broken Lands, then, you know, maybe see if there's another dedication that works for you. Otherwise, you really have to work at it. And then the issue is, depending on if you're playing an adventure path, that some adventure paths have campaigns that kind of are based around your players being from where you are. So if your players aren't, then it's questioning, well, why are your players invested in this region if they're not from this region, kind of deal. So very campaign specific, but otherwise not overall too bad. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this talk about the Aldori Duelist. If you have, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And I hope to see you guys in another one of my archetype discussing videos. Thank you guys.